the best place to work.
I love working here.
I feel very blessed.
I love it here.
I look forward to coming to work every day, being a part of this team.
Like a family away from home.
Where everyone feels like everybody knows their name.
A city that supports you. We see that with our benefits.
A pension, vacation days, job security.
Being able to be heard.
We feel valued. We feel respected.
Lee Summit is a very progressive city.
It's growing, it's thriving.
We have this drive towards not just doing a job, but doing it with a spirit of excellence.
I had the opportunity to continue to grow, regardless of 30 plus years doing this kind of work.
It's more than just dollars and cents.
We're here really to give back.
Providing a service to better a community.
To go out and serve people.
To be a part of something bigger than yourself. If I would have known what I know now, years ago, I would have been here much sooner.
Hello, Lee Summit. I'm Jordan. Here's your flash briefing for the week of January 5th. City Council will meet for a regular session Tuesday night at 6 in Council Chambers in City Hall. Meetings are open to the public or watch live on the city's YouTube channel. If you can't watch, catch the recorded meeting on demand on the YouTube channel or by subscribing to the Council Debrief newsletter, which breaks down 3 to 4 key agenda items. Subscribe at cityofls.net. Low temperatures are in the forecast this weekend. Be sure to protect your pipes by doing these 4 simple tasks. Disconnect hoses from outside spigots, leave cabinet doors open for warm air circulation, let water trickle to keep it flowing, and insulate pipes and faucets in unheated areas. Find more winterization tips at lswater.net. Join our team at the City of Lee Summit. The city offers rewarding career opportunities, a positive environment, and fantastic benefits. View all open opportunities at lspeople.net. Ready to feel stronger and healthier in the new year? Rev Up and Reload is a Lee Summit Parks and Recreation 6-week comprehensive wellness program designed to achieve your health goals. Receive nutrition classes and enjoy a group training atmosphere. Sign up at lsparks.net. Thanks for listening and have a great week.
Officers en route 914 armed robbery.
Welcome to the Lee Summit Sign Department. We are going to walk you through our process from start to finish. We make signs as needed here. It's not like we just go out into the field and place a speed limit sign here, no parking here. Our traffic engineers, they go through and they'll do field studies. They'll send us down an engineering work order for us to go out, place new signs or remove signs as needed. Coming from the material, our blanks come in and they're just aluminum blanks. We can put our white, our red, our fluorescent yellow, green, whatever. And basically what it looks like is just that there. Throw it up into the roller. And once we got it covered, take it to our work table here, and Tim will cut the corners, cut all the access off to where it's lined up right. As far as the plotter and the software that we use, there's a street name sign there, and he's gonna go ahead and print that out on the plotter so you can see the plotter and how it operates and runs. There's standards for the height, even just on letters on the sign blank. Basically what we have on the computer there is it's pretty much set up to those, and it goes through. It's got a very small but sharp needle that goes through and cuts everything out letter by letter. Once that's done cutting, our next stage would be bringing it over here Currently picking out the sign letters right now. We call it weeding or picking or however you want to call it. Next, putting it on the transfer tape. Then after it's taped, we bring it over to the roller. That's where we apply it to the actual sign blank. And we'll roll it through one time just to get the air bubbles out. And the last stage is basically just taking the transfer tape off the front of it. And there's a finished product of the street name sign. We'll take you out to the field and show you our process that we go through. We're gonna go out and follow our sign guys and get something installed for you. This is where we check our underground utilities. Tim, you got AT&T?
AT&T's back here.
Evergy, Google, so we should be good to go. We normally put all of our stuff together out in the field. Then once the base is installed, we'll go ahead and put the post in there. We've come up to perfect. And that's how we do it. Simple. Quick.
The City of Lee Summit has hundreds of traffic lights across its more than 1,000 lane miles, all managed by the city's Public Works traffic technicians. The work happens inside those metal boxes on the side of each intersection. Inside, technicians program a device called the controller. The controller communicates directly with each signal head via underground wires, telling each light when to turn on and off based on a programmed cycle. City traffic engineers design this cycle to allow traffic to flow as efficiently as possible for that particular intersection. In order to best match current traffic patterns, they install something called a detection system. Detection systems have taken many forms over the years, from sensors in the pavement to radar boxes. But in Lee Summit, they primarily consist of cameras, which workers mount above the traffic signals. These cameras don't record video or your speed. Instead, they monitor the spaces at the front of the intersection and identify when a vehicle is present in a specific spot. Once a vehicle is identified, the detection system sends a message to the controller, which then adapts its standard cycle to best serve the cars that are present. The pedestrian button works in a similar way. When the button is pressed, the controller receives a signal, requesting that it allow that section of the pedestrian walkway to go, which it then inserts into the signal pattern. Technicians also install something called a conflict monitor. The conflict monitor is a device in which they program all the potential patterns of lights that would lead to a collision. If the other systems mistakenly trigger those patterns, the conflict monitor sends the intersection into flash, causing all lights to flash red and directing drivers to treat it like an all-way stop. City traffic technicians implement and maintain these systems so effectively, we rarely consider them. But every time we safely pass through a signal-controlled intersection, it's all thanks to their work. So the next time you're waiting at a red light, remember the delicate coordination of super smart systems that move you through that space safely and efficiently every day.
I really love living in our historic downtown. I walk my dog around. The shops take her for, they do pub cups at Poppy's, so you can get ice cream with a little dog biscuit in it, which is her favorite thing in the world. My neighbors, we have block parties together. I really like how welcoming and how vibrant it is. It's an amazing place to live. Lee Summit's a really great community. I love living here, and I just wanted to try to find a way to give back, look out for my neighbors, for the community. I've always tried to be involved. Before serving on city council, I used to volunteer with AFS, which is an organization that hosts foreign exchange students. So my husband and I have hosted kids from around the world and then also volunteered with local families and schools. In my professional life, I'm a paralegal, and then in my personal life, I enjoy reading, sewing. I'm a quilter, so I just finished a log cabin quilt that I'm going to send to my aunt out in DC. I can't claim any of our council accomplishments for myself. This is always a team effort. But I am really excited about the farmers market and event space that we have coming in. It's still in the design phases, but I think it's going to be a really beautiful space, and it's going to really keep keeping our downtown thriving. It's been in progress for a long time, but I think that people are going to really love it when it's done. I think one of my top priorities is going to be attainable housing that, for example, I've been trying to find a place for my mom in Lee Summit. And it's really challenging finding something that really works for a retiree who doesn't have a huge budget. Just trying to make it more attainable for people no matter where they're at in their lives to be a part of our community. Community is what we make it. Everybody should get involved in whatever way they can, whether that's just voting or whether it's joining a board or a commission or even running for office. What do they say? The world is run by those who show up. So get involved however you can and make a difference in the community. Budget Committee for January the 7th. Can we get a roll call, please?
Mayor Pro Tem Lopez.
Here.
Chair Shields.
Here.
Councilmember Funk.
Here.
Vice Chair Lovell.
All right, first item is approval of the agenda. I would look for a motion, please.
Chair, I move to approve the agenda as published.
Second.
Thank you. I have a motion and a second to approve the agenda. Can we get a roll call vote?
Chair Shields.
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Lopez.
Aye.
Councilmember Funk.
Aye.
All right, next item on our agenda is public comments. Do we have any members of the public wishing to comment today or any comments submitted in advance? Okay. Then we'll move on to items of business. First is 5A 2025-7371, approval of the December 1, 2025 Finance and Budget Committee action letter. Do we have any discussion? If not, I would look for a motion.
Chair. I move to approve the action letter as presented.
Second.
Thank you. I have a motion and a second to approve the December 1st action letter. Can we get a vote, please?
Mayor Pro Tem Lopez.
Aye.
Councilmember Funk.
Aye.
Chair Shields.
Aye. All right, next item on the agenda is TMP-3557, an ordinance approving the 2026 Jackson County Board of Election Commissioners poll contracts for the Lovell Community Center, Longview Community Center, and Gamber Center, and authorizing the administrator of the Parks and Recreation to execute the same by and on behalf of the city. You're not Ms. Weber.
No, I'm not. So, good afternoon, Donna Lake, Assistant City Manager. This is the annual agreement between the Jackson County Election Board and Parks Department, using 3 of our community centers for polling locations. And there's a very nominal fee that they provide to the Parks Department to do that.
Okay. Do we have any discussion or questions? And if not, I would look for a motion.
Chair.
Yes.
I move to recommend for approval to full City Council TMP-3557, an ordinance approving the 2026 Jackson County Board of Election Commissioners poll contracts for the Lovell Community Center, Longview Community Center, and the Gamber Center, and authorizing the administrator of Parks and Recreation to execute the same by and on behalf of the city.
Second.
Thank you. I have a motion and a second to recommend TMP-3557 to council for approval. Can we get a vote, please?
Councilmember Funk.
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Lopez.
Aye.
Chair Shields.
Aye. All right, next item on our agenda is TMP-3559, an ordinance approving change order number 4 to the agreement for the Joint Operations Center Migration Plan between the City of Lee Summit and Motorola Solutions, Inc. for an increase in the contract price of system infrastructure costs of $2,824,533 and additional increases in annual system lifecycle maintenance cost of $317,490 and cybersecurity costs of $96,240 over a period of 6 years, and authorizing the city manager to execute an agreement for the same. And you don't look like Chief Forbes either.
And I'm not Chief Schneider either. I'm John Bunker, Deputy Chief PD. I'll present this to you today. This original agreement was executed on March 25th, 2025, and you hit the bullet points well. The underlying costs cover change order for the Motorola dispatch radio position upgrade of all radios and communication system components necessary for interoperability, redundancy within the primary dispatch center and backup facility, both housed out of our Joint Operations Center, or will be. And then you mentioned also the cybersecurity that's attached with that, as well as the annual maintenance that will go along with that. The funding for this was, I don't remember the exact date, but we received some state funding recently, which will cover the cost of this change order.
Is this kind of a nice to have because we got additional funding, or is this something that we needed and we were?
This was something we needed. We had a backup plan. We have existing equipment that can move over, but what the region's doing is the equipment is actually improving and moving on, but the region's still also trying to figure out how each individual dispatch center is going to fund that. So we're in actually a very good position with this, receiving the state funds that we did. Mm-hmm. We didn't have those initially when we were in the initial planning stages 24 months ago. So it was somewhat of a change order, or plan B, if you will, if funding came in. So we did have some backup plans. We're really glad we don't have to use those backup plans now, though. So.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions from the committee? If not, I would look for motion.
Chair.
Yes.
I move to recommend approval to full council an ordinance approving change order number 4 to the agreement for the Joint Operations Center migration plan between the City of Lee Summit and Motorola Solutions, Inc. for an increase in the contract price of the system infrastructure cost $2,824,533 and additional increases in annual system lifecycle maintenance cost of $317,490 and cybersecurity cost of $96,240 over a period of 6 years, and authorizing the city manager to execute an agreement for the same.
Second.
Thank you. We have a motion and a second to recommend TMP-3559 to council for approval. Can we get a vote, please?
Chair Shields. Mayor Pro Tem Lopez.
Aye.
Councilmember Funk.
Aye.
All right, that moves on to full council. All right, so next item on our agenda is 2025-7372, a presentation regarding project delivery methods. So this is on the agenda, sort of a discussion between Vice Chair Lovell and myself. I'm sure you guys know he's been very interested for a number of years in how we bid out large projects and how those different delivery methods, you know, kind of the pros and cons of each and how we use them. So we talked about getting this presentation on the agenda for today. He unfortunately had some personal matters come up and can't be here tonight, but I have some questions that he emailed over that I may try to work in a little bit tonight, which I've sent to staff too, so they may address those as well. Just kind of level setting, like we're not trying to change any policies tonight or anything. Level setting, either one. Take your pick. He could. Anyway, just kicking off a discussion, more education than anything to try to help us as the committee understand how these different procurement processes work, and then maybe launch some additional discussions going forward about those. So I will turn it over to Mr. Park. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Michael Park, Director of Public Works. And so appreciate that. Some of you might have been on Public Works Committee about 2 years ago. We did a very, very similar presentation. And we did that. Most agenda items that come through construction related, whether they be design contracts, construction change orders, those all go through Public Works Committee. So might be reason why you don't see a lot of that activity and you have good questions. We're going to try to answer those. We did get Councilmember Lovell's questions in advance. I appreciate that, and I'm going to try to address those as best I can. But feel free to interject your own questions throughout the presentation. Again, we started at a very high level as we go through this presentation, really to talk about procurement, the different, requests for qualifications, requests for proposals, bids, what those mean. And so this is at a very elementary level, kind of roles, design, bid, build, construction manager at risk, or CMAR, and design build is three primary project delivery methods. There are numerous others, and I'll just kind of mention those, but if you want to talk more about them, more than happy to. Also got support here from Mr. Elam and Mr. Binger up until a certain point, and others, because I'm not an expert in all of these delivery methods, and we'll do our best to answer your questions. Get into those comparisons, selection factors, which is really at the heart of, I believe, most of Councilmember Lovell's questions that he had, and so maybe we're able to address some of those along the way. So request for qualifications. This is really an area, and we're dictated by state statutes on selecting professional services. So think engineering design, you got surveying services, architectural design services. Those are selected on a qualification-based process. Requests for proposals are just that. They can include prices. They don't have to include prices. Those are proposals where it may be a combination of acquiring commodities or construction services with design services or professional services. There could be a combination of things there, but it would not be exclusively professional services. Those would have to go to an RFQ process. And then you have bids, which is just what it sounds like. We issue an advertisement. Companies submit their best cost forward to deliver that service, and we go with the typically lowest and best. Not always the lowest. Generally it is because we haven't got issues with the companies. But it's the lowest and best for the City of Lee Summit. I know other jurisdictions may just purely be lowest only, no discretionary choice in the matter. And so one thing we want to understand is there's a lot of terms when it comes to different delivery methods. Roles, owner is generally the City of Lee Summit in most cases. Who is the sponsor? That could be MoDOT. There could be other sponsors involved in a project. Who's the owner's representative? If we've hired somebody to act on our behalf. Who is the project manager? A lot of times that's the city staff. We have our own project managers, and we'll get to capacity and resource issues where we may outsource the role of the project manager. The designer could be staff, could be outsourced contract as well for a designer, engineering, architecture, surveying, all sorts of professional services. Consulting services, you have construction project managers. We have those in-house as well. But again, if we become limited in resource, we may outsource construction project management. You have sub-consultants. Sometimes we contract directly. Sometimes it's contracted through the prime contractor that we have. You have the contractor, and you have vendors, subcontractors. There's all other sorts of different roles in a project. And what's really important is these roles may be defined differently depending on those contract documents. And if there's one thing that's really critical is that you understand we cannot apply the same set of contract documents to every delivery method. They're very specific. You can't use a design-build contract on a CMAR project. It really creates conflict. The roles get misplaced, misunderstood, and you end up in a lot of lawsuits and pointing fingers. So we have to make sure we're using the right contract documents for the right project delivery method. So again, I'll focus on really the three primary methods most are familiar with: design, bid, build, which is what we normally use on a lot of our horizontal projects. And what I mean by that are like our roads, our sewers, our water lines. We also have done a lot of construction manager at risk, CMAR, for a lot of our vertical projects like fire stations, joint operations facility, Green Street. And then design build, we've done a little less of. I think we used kind of a design build process on the police substation. We used design build previously on Orchard Street between Douglas and Independence. Design build has its place too, and we're always looking for opportunities to use alternative delivery methods. Probably most recently, the design build process is being implemented for the Gateway Monument sign. You probably saw that come through City Council. Let's see if there's any others. Some other delivery methods, just kind of point out, you have public-private partnerships. We've done those before. Usually you'll see that associated with maybe development, and we'll enter into an agreement with a developer or somebody else to deliver a public improvement project. Some that might be on the horizon in that regard that we see advantageous to the city as well as to, the property owner or developer would be like Todd George Parkway. You think you got one large major developer surrounding the entire project. They've got a delivery schedule that doesn't align with our delivery schedule. Can we find value and benefit to the taxpayers if we make an agreement where they deliver it? Another one might be where you find public-private partnerships in a structure like a parking garage. If you've got an opportunity for private investment to make a better project with a public-private partnership project. There's also things we call multiple prime contracting. We haven't done really any of that where you contract with multiple primes. They're usually very complex, huge scale projects. I don't anticipate us doing any multiple primes here in the city. It gets really convoluted, and that you talk about confusion and pointing fingers at each other, that typically results. There's infinite or job order types of project delivery. It's really what you call like a scope without the defined quantities. And best case I can give you example that we have done some of this is like we have a pavement marking contract. It's an annual contract that we renew. We went out to bid, but the scope is clear. It's pavement marking. We give them all the information. We give them an estimated quantity, but that quantity is subject to change every year. But that's kind of that indefinite type of job order. We give them a job order, they go perform it that season, they come back the next season, and we're on a renewal provision up to a certain maximum number of renewals. So usually no design phase required in that type of contract that we would complete. And then we also do, and this was in one of Councilmember Lovell's questions, master service agreements. We tend to call them more like on-call contracts. And so we do that for on-call specialty technical services. We do that for surveying, some engineering. In fact, the Lakewood Way project was used what we would call an on-call or MSA contract for the design. We picked a couple of design firms earlier, went through the RFQ process. We said these are the two best out of many companies that had submitted. And now we pick among those two companies for smaller jobs to proceed in an expedient way without going through the whole rigmarole of selection again. So we do that. Fiber optic installation is another one. We use kind of an on-call agreement, signal, lighting maintenance, curb work, storm sewer. There's a lot of that more routine maintenance, typically smaller jobs where we're using these MSAs. Let's see. All right, just kind of at a very high level, the association and responsibilities and how they're really set up for design bid build. City being the owner, we then contract separately with a designer that's going through that RFQ process. That designer completes its project, completes its work 100%, then we contract separately from that designer with a general contractor. And the designer may have subconsultants, and that's their business. And you talk about transparency, that's really where the transparency may be lost a little bit, but not a lot under the design build, bid build process. Contractor also can have subcontractors, but it's ultimately that prime who bid that's responsible. And you can see then the process is very sequential. It's design, very beginning, very end, 100%, full control by the city. A lot of opportunity for public engagement. You can work through that process, not really so much concerned about time. And this design build process, it usually takes the longest because then sequentially construction phase begins. So, and transitioning between those, you have all the time of the procurement process. You go out for solicitations or you go out for advertisement. You have that period, as opposed to you'll see in the next two methods, there's overlap and varying degrees of overlap. And that really cuts down on some of the time to delivery. And so under construction manager at risk, this is one of the alternatives that you've seen more recently. City is still the owner, and we still contract with a designer, and we contract with a construction manager at risk, but we have coordination requirements between those two contracts. And oftentimes we may even select them together at the same time, or we may select them, say design gets through a certain percentage, maybe it's 30%, we get a better idea, then we contract with the construction manager well before there's any final plans, so that they're then working together as a design, working with the contractor to deliver a project that maybe the contractor has a better way of influencing costs, reducing costs, looking at alternatives to deliver that project. So you kind of have that pre-construction, then construction, a little bit of overlap with design. And I think typically we will see that construction manager at risk come forward with what you've heard as a GMP or a guaranteed maximum price. Usually when that design is about that, I've seen typically around that 80 to 100%. So they're pretty certain on what those prices are, and that's what that guaranteed maximum price does. It gives you as the owner the certainty on what that maximum price should be, with the exception of any owner-directed changes in scope. That risk has otherwise been transferred to that CMAR. And then design build is more integrated. You can see there's no separate, typically there's not a separate design and construction. There are several variations of design build where you might have a conceptual first before going out and selecting a design build team, and that design build team may be contractor led, it might be designer led, it might be one company that is fully integrated, contractor and designer all in one. And really this is one that probably produces or achieves the project outcome the quickest. But it also is one that usually has the least amount of transparency and certainly has the least amount of control on the owner's part. You're kind of turning that over and you're turning that risk over and everything else to that design build team. And like I said, there's multiple variations of design build. You have kind of this progressive design build, fully integrated design build, and they are preparing a GMP much earlier in the project, which usually will have much more risk on their side built in, and that's when you'll hear terms like contingency, you'll have owner's contingency, you'll have, and you have this too with CMAR, but contractor's contingency, and you'll have different terms in the contract of how that contingency is shared if they don't reach it. And a lot less of what you see in the design bid build process where you have very line item, measured quantities, defined unit prices, full control, and it takes a lot more scrutiny, but there's a lot more transparency in that too. So here's kind of A full comparison of all three processes, kind of graphically depicting, design, bid, build takes the longest. We expect that. Design, build generally is the shortest schedule. And CMAR is typically somewhere in between. You can see where those lay out. Just another general comparison on how the relationships work and where that competition exists. Design, bid, build, that competition is directly there with the general contractor, prime contractor. You're seeing that in the bid documents that come out. You're not necessarily seeing all the subs. Under the construction manager at risk, that competition still exists. It's occurring, though, between the subcontractors and general contractor, and they may change that throughout the project. And selection factors, and this is where I might transition a little bit over to Councilmember Lovell's questions, because a lot of his questions focused in on selection, how we go through this process, when do we decide which method to use, and so I might look over to my notes here a little bit on what he had specifically mentioned. But here's just some of those factors that I had put in and prepared prior to receiving his specifics, which he listed quite a few of these as well. He was asking in particular, what are the goals, and is it project by project, or is it more just, hey, here's our standard, here's what we look for? And I'll say it is project by project. It's not a rigid matrix of selecting what factors we look at or how we weight the factors, because each project has its unique interest and priorities. So it could be, as Councilmember Lovell had pointed out, cost certainty. That could be really important on one project, but not necessarily as important on another project in comparison to other factors. Speed and schedule is always something we look at. Risk transfer, he mentioned that. Quality of the project or the outcome, what is the end result? He mentioned staff, resource, capability, and capacity. We look at those too when selecting the design process. The long-term asset value, and so what I think he's referring to here is, do we look at alternate bids? We do. In good comparison there would be, do we look at the alternative of like asphalt versus concrete on a project? We do assess the life cycle cost analysis over the life of the asset to determine what is the better project that we want. In material, it could be in systems if you're looking at buildings. We do go through that cost analysis, not just of what today's price is, but what are the longer term maintenance costs, what is the life expectancy of that asset, as part of all of these delivery methods. Some other things he hadn't mentioned, but we do look at for each project is what amount of control do we really need on the project and flexibility? How much public engagement, for example, do we have? What are some of the other influences that we need to take into consideration? Maybe some of these factors are limited by, like if our factor is schedule, but we can't really gain anything in schedule because we got too many properties to acquire, we got too many utilities to move. Well, I wouldn't put a lot of weight then in schedule to drive us to a delivery method that we're not going to reap any real benefit from because we're being controlled by other factors that are outside of our control. Same things may be with grant funds or source of funds. Maybe it is a factor we consider in the delivery method of a project because it may have its own constraints and what process we use or the timeline that we deliver a project. Transparency and engagement, he hadn't listed that, but that is also something that we consider. And it's probably for one reason most of our horizontal projects, which aren't as time constrained, we go with a typical design, bid, build process because it offers the most opportunity for engagement, for transparency, for the city to have full control and to get the most in that prime competition. But there's reasons we don't do it on more vertical projects because you have so much more quantities, you need more flexibility, you need more option, but you're going to give up. There's always some trade-offs and some of these factors that you're considering. I had mentioned grants and the sources of fundings and their restrictions being those factors that we look at. The public impact, so whether it be a facility project or a horizontal infrastructure project, what is the risk of that project delay and the time of its delivery? Is there a risk to property damages? Is there a risk to public and how long it's drawn out that we're trying to mitigate the project with the project? So those are factors that we consider. We look at the market conditions. as well. You know, maybe one project delivery method is better for our current market conditions because there's maybe a ton of work going on. There's not a lot of opportunity. We're not seeing good bids. We might look to shift to a different project delivery method where we can better position the city to get better prices, better quality, and a better project schedule. And then whether or not there's opportunities for these public-private partnerships. That is a factor that we look at in picking the design delivery method or the project delivery method. And how each one of those goals or factors are weighted differs based on the project scope, its complexity, where it is, what the public impacts are, what have been our commitments that we've taken to voters, those sort of things. All have a different weighting in how we review on a project-by-project basis. So I think it's intentional that we don't have a very rigid and prescriptive matrix on picking which method to use, but it is truly a project-by-project selection. And that selection is done by staff, though we do engage stakeholders. We engage whether that be sponsors, we engage you all as we go through the CIP process. We engage adjacent landowners and developers, and there are those stakeholders that we have to reach out to get a perspective on, well, what are their time demands? You know, what are our cost and budget constraints? And what is the demand of the public to have influence in this project and control, right? So we do engage the public, we engage you all, we engage everybody, but staff goes through this process every year before, and one of his Councilmember Lovell's question is, when does this happen? It happens after we identify a project in that early scoping phase. A lot of times it happens after we've kind of priced the project and secured some funding so we know we have a real project, but before we do anything with regard to design. And so I would say it happens, project's been identified and it's been proposed in the CIP. We've probably got some idea of what our project delivery preferred method is. So whether it's in year 5 of the CIP or year 1, if it's out in that 4th year, 5th year, it's probably subject to change a little bit as these factors change. If it's in that first year of the CIP, we're pretty certain, and we're probably already talking to contractors, if it's a CMAR or design build, or we're talking to design professionals, they're already asking us what's coming out next year. So it may be up to a year in advance, we already know. And we might have opportunities to communicate that earlier. We have a CIP document. If we know what delivery method, we might be able to add some more information into that CIP document about the delivery or the anticipated delivery method as a way of creating awareness to the contracting agency or contracting industry and the professional services industry, so they can see, oh, it's in the CIP, they expect this to be another design bid build, or they expect this one to be design build. And so they can start making their preparations further in advance than maybe otherwise are. Let's see, then he had some questions about, the formal decision-making framework or checklist used on whether a project is design, bid, build, CMAR, or design build, as I kind of alluded to. There's not a rigid framework, there's not, but we do keep all those options open. We do try to keep up on industry best practices as they're always changing. We rely heavily on Design Build, Institute of America, DBIA, to look at some of those ways of doing it. We're involved in American Public Works Association and all these professional organizations that help develop the contract documents, help develop the standards and best practice, and they have got a better pulse on what's happening around the industry, not just here locally, but kind of let us know what is preferred and what has the most competition and provides the best project at the best price for our residents. So moving on to maybe a couple more questions that he had here. I already addressed, I believe, I tried to address, at what point in project planning is the delivery method selected? Like I said, really it's as we begin to propose that project into the CIP, we have a pretty good idea of what is our expected delivery method. Are there any specific project types or dollar thresholds that automatically steer projects towards one delivery method or another? I would say somewhat. We kind of start from, well, horizontal, we know usually we get what we're looking for out of a typical design bid build process. Vertical projects, I think we have had better success using CMAR and maybe even in design build than your design bid build process. And then when it gets to, as I said, those master service agreements or on-calls, we also kind of self-impose some of those, that guidance. You know, I don't think we really want to use a master service agreement on a $20 million job. We do typically use those service agreements, maintenance, smaller projects, I think $5 million or less. We typically lean in on that just to save time. You all have already reviewed and approved these design professionals or these contractors, and we have them readily available. We already have their bid prices, or we have their scope of services that you've said, yes, they're qualified, we want to use them. I think the point on creating those contracts or those agreements is that we do use them. But, you know, those thresholds and those decision points are all subject to, you know, discretion, your change. Some of that is found in the procurement policy, and that gives us some direction on where and when and how we use different procurement methods for construction and other acquisitions, whether it be commodities or supplies and services, I believe. So, and I think we have a procurement policy update probably being presented here in the next 2 to 3 months. Okay. So that's one way we do it. And so, yes, there are things we look at that help steer us a little bit from the very beginning on which direction we're going to go. And then another question he had was, how does staff capacity and internal expertise factor into delivery method selection? It does, and it does for all project delivery methods. We do have staff resources where we have completed all the design and even all the construction without outsourcing any of it. Sometimes it's just a matter of we don't have staff capacity to do it. And so we have to outsource the design, and we become just project managers. Same thing, even to the extent, I think over this last year, we experienced where we didn't even have the staff capacity to inspect a job we're fully capable. We have the expertise to inspect, but we didn't have the capacity. We were so busy, we had to outsource the inspection services and the construction management services on that. And you're paying a very, very high price to outsource those kind of services. And so we may be in a position, and we've talked to Public Works Committee about this and presenting the CIP, defer that project to a point where we can still internalize that project management. We can still do those inspections where we can save the taxpayers their money when schedule isn't so demanding that we have to simultaneously deliver all these projects that we have to outsource those services we could already provide. Now, there are some things that we don't have the expertise to do, and we have to outsource those, and you'll see those things come forward in our professional agreements where they're doing, say, bridge inspections, or they're inspecting some wireless communication system. We don't have all the expertise on staff, so we'll outsource those things too. Another thing, and it wasn't mentioned in his question, but when you talk about capacity, it's not just the staff resource capacity or expertise, but it's also our financial capacity. And we make decisions, can we do all this work? Do we have the cash flow to do all this work? Do we debt finance this work? And some of those help us make decisions on what projects are more important now, what can we concurrently do, what can't we do because we have a financial restraint without going out to debt. And we've been receiving guidance from City Council that for certain projects, we don't want to debt finance. We want to cash flow those projects. And so we continue to take that guidance until otherwise it changes. And we come back to council, we say, okay, you want to still cash flow this. That means we're going to have to push this project out if you want to move this project forward, and we have to start moving priorities around. And I know at Public Works Committee, we're having that conversation. We do every year, and we'll really start to dig into it again in February, where we start to put together that whole CIP. So moving on to project assignment and predictability questions from Councilmember Lovell. How will upcoming projects be assigned to each delivery method, and will that information be communicated in advance? As I said, it's really project by project, and it kind of gave you some insight into that decision comes by staff working through the CIP process, engaging stakeholders and you all as we're building that CIP, which is our 5-year financially constrained list of projects that we are pursuing. So another question he had under here was, is there an intent to balance work across delivery methods or vendors, or is it selection strictly project by project? It is project by project. And as I said on your bid on proposals are a little bit kind of a hybrid, but on bid, certainly it's lowest and best. Most qualified, lowest and best bid received. We aren't looking to spread the work around and picking a high bid because they haven't had any work in the city. That's not happening. When it comes to qualification-based services, it's qualification-based. We're picking who we think is the best, but we are cognizant that we don't want a reputation that we're always picking the same firm for professional services. We are aware of previous work history, with a professional firm. We understand those things, and those do influence who we ultimately recommend a contract for you to consider. And so I think we've done pretty good when, we hear consultants come by and they're like, well, who do you use? And I'll say, you look across our CIP, we're using probably a dozen different professional firms to do our work. We're spreading it around. We're making sure that there's still interest in the community. What you don't want to have is a reputation that this community only picks one or two companies, because then you lose that competition, you lose the interest, and honestly, some of those designers become complacent. They feel like, hey, it's a guarantee. I've been doing every job in Lee Summit. I'm going to keep getting every job in Lee Summit. We don't want that either. So I'd say we have an awareness of it, but we don't intentionally spread things around, if that makes sense. Moving on to another group of questions he had with vendor selection and procurement strategy. Here he was talking, I think, really mostly focused in on these master service agreements. Has the city evaluated the use of master service agreements? And then if we have not, would we? As I explained, we do. We use them quite a bit. We use them for fiber, lighting, signals, sewer work, inspections, lab services. There's a lot of things we use MSAs. I think it's just terminology, and understanding what we call on-calls are typically what probably Councilmember Lovell is familiar with, master service agreements. And then moving on to really the last category of questions that Councilmember Lovell had, governance and transparency. How does the city ensure transparency and competitiveness while maintaining efficiency and procurement? As I described in each of these project delivery methods, there's probably a trade-off in transparency. Design, bid, build, most transparent, and as you get further or you deviate further from that, you relinquish that control, you transfer that risk. With that, you typically are transferring a lot of that transparency. Some of the other things that we do for transparency is we have a procurement policy, and we're very transparent about what that is and our procurement methods. We have a web page for procurement. We put all of our contracts out there. We advertise publicly all of our contracts. There could be other things. I say there's always opportunity to improve, and that really was kind of his last question, is are there opportunities to standardize delivery and procurement approaches to reduce variability and administrative burden? I do think there's always opportunity to improve. We're constantly looking at our contract documents. Can we update those? Can we make sure that they are standard for each delivery approach that we're pursuing? Because that contractor wants certainty. They want to know what to expect with the project. And that's what brings better competition. That's what brings better prices. I think that's what the contracting industry is looking for. They don't want you changing your contract documents constantly. That's just one example of one thing we're doing to try to help engage them. We are always looking for better ways to create awareness when there are these opportunities for either RFQ, RFP, or bid opportunities for different groups. And there could be other ways to enhance communications and notices, reporting, giving you status updates, all that kind of stuff, letting people know what's coming ahead so that they can prepare. Usually we get better bids the more advanced notice they have that something's coming forward. And then last thing I'll touch on here is examples. This was one of the, I think, most critical things that Councilmember Lovell said he wanted to talk about was examples, and I don't know that we're prepared to give a lot of detailed examples, but we can follow up. Examples of projects, and was the outcome what we expected, right? And I think that's important. So for design, bid, build, that's what we would use on Colburn Road and 3rd Street, our stormwater projects, Hangar 2, which honestly could have maybe used an alternative delivery method than the design, bid, build. What we have experienced in design, bid, build is less than 2% change order typically every year. I know we have set our own goal to be under 5% in change orders for design, bid, build, project delivery methods, and kind of a norm in the industry, at least kind of last we had heard, was about 10% or under. So we feel like we're doing a good job in controlling those costs, fully controlling them, and delivering them really on budget. And most of those change orders are owner, city directed changes in scope, as opposed to something that was unforeseen. Some of the examples of CMAR would be Joint Operations Facility. I think we're looking at probably Fire Station number 1. The other fire stations that were more recently completed were in CMAR. Green Street was a CMAR project. And I think, I don't know that Sharon is here to talk about Green Street as an example, but I think the contingency on the CMAR contract with Green Street has a refund of money of that contingency to the owner, to the city of Lee Summit, a pretty substantial dollars, nearly $200,000, Ryan? Is it? $130,000. So that risk that was taken on and the contingencies that were built in that allow for some of the flexible and design changes and things, that project actually turned out pretty well from a CMAR and a GMP standpoint, where we didn't hit the budget. It came back to us. And then, as I had mentioned, design build, police substation was one where the scope is really well defined. It's contained. It's not going to be influenced by property acquisitions. Usually utilities aren't an issue. And it really, we quickly delivered the PD substation. Another project I mentioned earlier in the presentation was Orchard Street from Douglas to Independence. This was several years ago. We thought we would try design build. Honestly, the outcome did not give us the benefits we had hoped. We thought we could deliver that project quicker. We knew we were going to pay a higher price tag for it, but the amount of property acquisitions that we had to do, the utility relocations, it didn't save us any time at all in the project. In fact, maybe it even took us a little longer, because you're wrangling around with construction changes and field directives while you're still trying to acquire some of the lands that you would need that you didn't know you would need at that point in the project. You would hit utilities that should have been out of the way that weren't quite yet. We also experienced something similar on another design build. This was phase 1 of Ward Road. We since completed Ward Road phase 2 south of M150 Highway. We were working with Pulte and Kensington Farms and thought we could deliver this in a design build process. Again, I think the acquisitions, the coordination really negated the schedule gains that we thought we could maybe get through a design build process on that. Those are, I think, the only design build projects we've had recently. But looking forward, I do think Todd George Parkway, either design build or a public-private partnership is very likely a good delivery method for that one. And we may see some of our vertical projects also continuing with the theme of CMAR or design build moving forward as well. I think I gave quite a few examples on master service agreements or on-calls, but if you've got any questions on that type of delivery method, I'd be happy to talk about it too.
Well, thank you. That was very, very informative. I liked it. So, do we have any questions or discussion from any? I've got a few items that I'll want to hit, but happy to have you guys chime in.
I got a few.
Yeah.
I think having this brief conversation as well with Councilmember Lovell, on the master service agreements, there's several. We just personal research, Johnson County, they have a master service agreement that has qualified 3 or 4 general contractors. Now, these are projects that don't exceed X amount of millions of dollars. And I think that's more along the lines that, they're usually design build projects, they're vertical projects, they're not stormwater or anything of that nature. I think that's kind of a package that he was looking at. Job order contracts, those are very efficient, very strong in Kansas City. They've been very successful with those. Just a few of those things.
I got that from his line of questioning. It was really focused on what I would say are vertical projects.
Vertical construction.
Because I don't know that we have any of these MSAs for vertical projects or your job order contracts for vertical projects. Like I said, we do have those for our horizontal projects. I got job order, what you call job order contracts for pavement marking. I got job order contracts for a number of things, mostly maintenance, where we determine quantities on an annual fiscal basis and we issue job orders and they just go do it. We have master service agreements, or what we call on-call, for a lot of different services. And, you know, we have 2 engineers on call. We just gave Lakewood Way project to one of those engineers without you really going through that whole RFQ process. We have on-call surveyors that we use. We have on-call appraisers. We have 3 of those that, you know, we pick and we use. But I don't think we have any of that for vertical projects, which might be why he was really honed in on vertical projects, CMAR, he was really focusing on design, build, and CMAR, which would lend itself to those. And we don't have anybody on contract for that type of work.
And I think, just from my colleagues, the transparency thing, I really appreciate that. And I think when you come to understanding and knowing CMAR projects and design build projects, of transferring that risk, I think those are very transparent ways of doing business, because in the beginning we've relayed to our community, this is what we're building and this is how much it's going to cost. We're passing that risk to the team and it's done. You know, I don't know if there's transparency throughout the project. You're going to see it. It's going to go up. A new fire station, a new administrative building, whatever the case may be. But I appreciate the discussion on transparency, and I think I like those contracts when we talk about vertical construction, that it takes the risk away from the city. And I think a lot of councilmember level stuff is driven more towards our vertical construction projects and understanding, can we get super competitive? Can we transfer this risk to the CMR or the design build team and those kind of things? And I think that transparency piece, I think, is the front end. Right. You know, how are we getting to these contractors? You know, there's platforms out there, and I'm sure you're very familiar with Building Connected and Procore, that these contractors, I've seen projects the school district uses Building Connected with certain general contractors, that every subcontractor that's in town that can do business has an opportunity to bid on our work and to bid to that general contractor, and it's all public information.
Right, and I think that's clear. We see there's a different group of vertical versus horizontal. That's why I try to most elementarily separate those two. And I completely agree with you on vertical construction. And for anybody that's watching, the risk who might not be in this is really the change order risk, right? The cost escalation. And when you have a vertical project, think of the thousands and thousands of different items, everything from doorknobs to tile and all of those things. You can transfer the risk of the quantities not being right, the change in material selection, the systems that you want to change. You can change all of that. You transfer that. Now, some of that control goes with that risk, but you now have a maximum price, right? So you have cost certainty. On your horizontal projects, and I just want to relate to those that might be listening, your quantity list is not that long. It all fits on usually 1 page, right, or 2 pages. And so you can measure the quantities. You have full control. You have cost certainty built in to those horizontal projects that you just don't with a vertical project. That's why they're very different.
Sure. No, totally understandable and great explanation. But I think kind of thinking in councilmember level's mind, which is scary, but I think most all of this relates to vertical construction, and I think the understanding of design, bid, build for, you know, horizontal construction makes sense. We don't know what's underneath there. We don't know where we're going to end up underground there. But I like this. I mean, I think this is a great discussion. You know, I would love to see our vertical construction transfer that risk as quickly as possible and get that GMP. And we know we've took our taxpayer dollars, We've got, the best team, we've got the best price we can achieve. It's very transparent. Let's go build it. And, we sit back and watch the beauty of it happen.
That's great feedback, and it's something I'm happy to say our staff is already working on, the contract documents and updates for CMAR and design build, which would be mostly applicable to vertical construction. And that risk transfer and knowing that GMP earlier is probably your design build rather than CMAR.
Yes.
You're going to get that GMP probably at about a 30%.
Thank you, Chair.
No, I wouldn't repeat what he's already said. I agree. I think, first of all, thanks. This is really helpful for us and for the public. And I don't claim to be an expert in construction like both of you, but I know enough to be dangerous, I guess. But to Councilmember Lovell's initial concern, I think those are some abnormal things that happened. And I think his initial concern involved the 2 fire stations, 4 and 5. And that was coming off of COVID, and we saw some really odd increase in material costs and construction costs during that time. And so I think that's what kind of caused a lot of red flags. But his questions are spot on, I think, and you've done a great job of answering them. I think as we move forward, again, with like Councilmember Funk has already said, I think that's a good path for us to proceed with vertical stuff. As far as horizontal, I mean, I could think of, you already said it, we're going to have some partnerships. I'm thinking of Todd George and on the church land. I think that makes total sense if that's kind of the direction we're probably headed. I see us heading down the road probably because our CIP list, it's hard for us to really address everything for a lot of reasons, just bandwidth, capacity for you guys. And so if we can have a private-public partnership, I think it makes a lot of sense in situations like that. So, yeah, I think we just need to stay always transparent, and whether it's perception or reality, you know how that works. I think bidding process and RFPs and RFQs could a lot of times be misconstrued. But I think Councilmember Lovell's initial point or red flags or concerns were those 2 fire stations. So, but this has been very helpful.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I don't want to elaborate too far onto the first 2 fire stations, but those were honestly some of our first.
Yeah.
Going vertical construction, CMAR, and some of that might not be on contractor or design team that was working together, but our understanding of the contract documents, and as I started first, you have to have the right contract documents for the right project delivery method. And I'm not standing here telling you 100% we had them correct or that we interpreted them correct. And that can create a lot of conflict, that can cause cost escalation, but there were also other factors, as you said, Mayor Pro Tem, about inflation. There was sourcing issues with materials. There were a lot of other outside influences on that too.
So there were a few items I wanted to kind of touch on. First was just briefly mention the procurement policy is going to come up in a couple of months. Is that something that could be emailed around to the committee members, the current version, just so that we can look it over before the revisions come through later? Okay. Okay. Yeah, that's a small thing, just if, when you have a chance. And then I think when you talked about maybe adding to the CIP plan, what bid method you think you're going to likely use, I think that it might be nice to add like a line item like this is anticipated to be a CMAR or a design bid build or whatever. Just
if we know, I think, yeah, we could do that. You'll also see, we've started doing this in our packets in the impact and analysis section for any of our construction jobs, trying to elaborate a little bit on what method we picked and why. So you'll see that, I think, you just passed next week for the award of bid on Olive and Orchard. And in that packet, you'll see that we chose the design bid build process. Here's why. It's because it's horizontal construction, a lot of property acquisitions, utility relocations. There was no gain in schedule by an alternative delivery method. So.
Okay. And with something like that, like I don't want it to be something where it's creating a whole.
No, just very simple.
The work, just a simple line, and even if sometimes it's just TBD, but transparency is always great. I guess there were a few things. I'm not really sure what order to address these ones in. I think first, one thing Councilmember Lovell had mentioned is that he's interested in maybe some, if we want to call it a retrospective or a post-mortem on a couple of projects to say, like, give an example of, and you kind of listed some examples, but to do a little bit more of an in-depth look at a case study of one that was a CMAR or design bid build and what went well, what didn't go well. I'm not sure how much we can talk about publicly in terms of the bid process. And
we can, as I said on one of his questions, we can always do better. There's always room for improvement. And after having these conversations and reading between some of the lines in dialogue, I think what he's mostly interested in are these vertical CMAR design build projects and getting that information back to you at the end of a project about, was the outcome right? You know, how were we in respect to the GMP? Because you don't get that on those projects like you do on our horizontal design bid build. We give you the monthly change order status report. So you're tracking all along, and we give you an annual change order status report. You know, I said we're under 2%, but you're not getting that same level of reflection on the other project types and the other project delivery methods, and maybe that's something internally staff we can talk about. Is that information that we can communicate? How could we best communicate that or
and I'm
roll
not
it into
saying
a summary?
at this point that we need to have a wholesale change in procedures. I mean, that's something that would be a bigger discussion. But I think it'd be really interesting for this committee to just have a couple of like case studies that you bring forward and like say, and definitely one of those fire stations, like here was how we chose the design method, here was the process, here were the surprises that we found and the lessons that we learned, or here's what went really well. Like I think that would be really interesting for us to see specifically about that project, but also just like in more detail, like to say, you've given us kind of the framework conceptually of how this works, and now let's see it in practice. Like, what does that look like from cradle to grave on a project like this? So do you think in the next couple of months that's something that you could put together for 2 or 3 projects maybe to give some information about how that went?
Yeah, we could talk with city manager's team and see what we could present, how we want to present that, whether that's just a report or a presentation of a few projects. Like I said, we're also already talking about communication, you know, summaries to the full council, and does this fall into one of those communications about, you know, reporting back the reflection of projects after they're done. In this case, we might have to go back further than recently completed projects if you wanted to look at history. But
right. And I guess I'm sort of thinking like, one, it'd be just like this presentation be kind of educational for us. But also then as we kind of go through it and ask some questions, we might start to understand for ourselves what points are the most useful that we would want to be the data that you guys report out to us later on other projects. I think it'd be
the only other thing is I think
exercise.
whatever we're doing here, I think is just as important, if not maybe more, that we give that same information to Public Works Committee who are reviewing these contracts as they come forward. So whether it's here and there, or, you know, the council's decision where to assign that, if it's to be assigned to work at.
Yeah, and I don't know, are you saying a presentation to the full council?
I guess I don't control the full council agenda. I'm interested in it for our purposes as this committee, but if it would make more sense at the full council, or if Mayor
No, I'm
Pro
not
Tem
advocating
wanted to-
for that. I'm
Yeah.
just saying, I think it's appropriate, like for us and maybe
Yeah.
Public Works, and then maybe some kind of written report to the full council, I think would be appropriate.
Anyway, so like for the fire station, and then maybe like one other of each of the different procurement methods, I think it'd be really interesting to hear. So, and then I guess the only other thing that's kind of been on my mind with this is like, the city does a ton of projects, but there are projects and there's projects. Like Green Street and a fire station are, I think of as sort of like mega projects, which I know like on the scale of construction across the country they're not, but to like us they are. And I feel like for some of those, what I think of as like big signature community projects, it'd be nice to hear before it goes out to bid, like, here's our thought process of how we're going to do this. Because I think one of the frustrations that sometimes happens is like, the staff does a really great job, takes all this through, but it's like it comes to us as like a finished thing, like it's just a yes or a no. And the discussion that happens way on the back end of which of these routes are we going to take is something that we never see until it's coming before us for a vote. So just on some of those, like the bigger ones, the more signature projects, I would like to find a way to be more informed up front. Of course, maybe some of that's just going through Public Works and CIP, and so I'm not having eyes on it, but.
I would say a lot of that probably is happening, and maybe we need to do a little better job as we're working the CIP through the Public Works Committee, or even questions as it advances out of Public Works Committee to the full council to say, well, how is that project, how do you expect that project to be delivered, where we can answer that, or maybe that's incorporating that information into, like you were suggesting, into the CIP itself on a project sheet.
And maybe some of these, like, again, the really big projects, maybe it's a thing for like staff roundtable at full council, just if it's something that's like the level of a fire station or above, that the full council just gets some short, quick updates as the process is going along, like this is coming up, we're starting to put together the bid process, just to have transparency to the full group.
I'm trying to think. That could be part of that communication consideration that we're talking about in these updates. Right now, I know and we include some of it on the vertical construction, but mostly it's our business is the horizontal. In our monthly project status report, so it goes from design all the way through construction and construction change order. We do, and I'm not sure if you all read it, but because it is very detailed, it talks about where we are in the process, like we're beginning the RFQ process, or we're beginning this process, we're going to advertise next month. So it does give that kind of information in there, but it's obviously not reaching. So we can always do better in that.
And again, like there's so much information, and this is some on me that I don't have time to dig into every single thing, but just for some of those bigger projects to have some more small status updates.
Elevate those up so it's.
Yes, that when there's so much information about every project in the city, it is important that that's all public and transparent, but for some of the big ones to highlight them a little bit.
I don't expect you to read this 10-page project status report that comes out every month. So.
Should. I bet Trish does. Anyway, do we have any other questions or discussion from the committee? Okay. No, thank you very much. This was really informative, and we really do appreciate it.
You're welcome.
And I'm going to make sure Councilmember Lovell goes back and watches the video, because you did a great job answering his questions. All right. Next item on our agenda is 2025-7386, a presentation regarding the annual comprehensive financial report for the year ended June 30, 2025 by Forvis Mazars LLP. Ms. Berichter.
Yeah, good afternoon. Brianna Berichter, Director of Finance. Today we have a presentation by our city auditors, Forvis Mazars, as a result of the conclusion of our annual fiscal year end audit for June 30th, 2025. I'm going to quickly give you just some general fund highlights, and then I will kick it over to them for presentation. For the fiscal year 2025, it does look a little bit different. The city's general fund expenses exceeded expenditures, and net transfers out by approximately $16.1 million, or 33% compared to the prior fiscal year. This was due to our planned spend down of fund balance, as those reserves had grown significantly over the past few years. That led council to look for opportunities to invest in the community using those fund balance reserves for one-time needs. This included investments in the Green Street Market, the Downtown Safety Package, and vehicle replacement programs. The city also recognized approximately $2 million in write-offs for EMS billing as well, that contributed to that spend down. The ending fund balance is approximately $33 million in the general fund, which is 34.6% of expenditures, which falls in our recommended fund balance, so we're still sitting very healthy with our reserves. The annual comprehensive report is posted online for anyone to review, as well as you each got a little present from me of your own personal copy of that. So feel free to peruse that and dig in on that. I am going to now turn it over to Rachel Dwiggins, Managing Director with Forvis Mazars.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for the opportunity to be here. As mentioned, my name is Rachel Dwiggins. I'm the managing partner of our Kansas City office of the firm, and I just wanted to kick us off by saying, first of all, thank you for the opportunity to serve as the external audit firm. This was our first year to serve in that role. And with that, that can come with challenges when you, in a year where you switch audit firms. And then if you couple that in a year where you're also going through a system conversion, such as Workday, that can present challenges. But I am very happy to report that thanks to the hard work and the commitment of management and staff, that it was a very successful audit, and we were able to issue the audit ahead of the deadline and ahead of the holidays. So that was exciting, I think, for everyone. But with that, I'm going to turn it over to Matt McCall, who is a director on the audit team, and he's going to walk through and hit the highlights of the audit itself. And I'm sorry, but it's a lot more than 10 pages, so for your reading enjoyment.
All right, thank you, Rachel, and thank you for having us here today. So the agenda that we're going to cover, first I'm going to cover the scope of the audit itself. Then we have some communications that as your auditor we are required to make to those in charge with governance, so want to make sure we cover those today. We'll take a bird's eye view of what is our audit approach, what is the strategy that we use when we approach an audit, talk about some accounting changes that you'll see in this year's ACFR as opposed to the prior year, and then we'll review a summary of the compliance results of your audit. So our audit was for the fiscal year ended June 30, 2025. We assisted in the preparation of your annual comprehensive financial report, or ACFR, and we also performed our audit under uniform guidance for the year ended June 30, 2025. That is a compliance audit over your major federal awards programs. So as your auditor, we are ultimately responsible for issuing an opinion on your financials as to whether or not they were accurately stated in all material respects. But that doesn't mean that management isn't still responsible for fair presentation and preparation of those financial statements. And it's also important to remember that governance still is responsible for oversight. As your auditor, we maintain our independence throughout the entirety of the audit process, maintain the appropriate degree of professional skepticism as we worked through the audit. We did issue what's called an unmodified opinion. That's a clean opinion. It means that we believe your financial statements are accurately stated. So kudos to management on another clean audit. That's the opinion that you all should expect to see. As Rachel said, management was very helpful throughout the audit process, very timely in providing us our audit requests, answering our questions, and so no disagreements with management, no unusual accounting or alternative accounting treatments to speak of, no difficulties during the course of the audit. During the course of any audit, we will spend a significant amount of time looking at management's judgments and estimates. This is an area that's more susceptible to error in any financial statements. During the course of the audit, we did not find any issues with regard to management's estimates. Also, no audit adjustments recorded as a result of the audit. We did identify some misstatements that we brought to management's attention. Management determined that both individually and in the aggregate, those misstatements were not material to the financial statements. We ultimately agreed with management's decision not to record those misstatements within the financial statements. And then lastly here, I want to point out, in the audit report, there is a page that calls out the GFOA Certificate of Achievement for Excellence in Financial Reporting. This relates to the prior year ACFR report, so kudos to management for that as well. So an audit is performed on what's called a test basis. It wouldn't be economically feasible for us to test every single transaction that occurs during the course of the city's fiscal year. So the way that we do this is we first assess risk. And to do this, we review your financial statements, look at certain financial metrics similar to some of those that Brianna was just discussing, look at the design of your internal controls, looking at your cash inflows, cash outflows cycles, payroll cycles, investing, debt and financing, to get an understanding of, is your control structure appropriately designed? And then we have discussions with management and with governance to understand, is there anything unusual going on this year, anything different this year that we need to consider as your auditors, anything keeping you up at night that we need to think through? And based on those procedures and those discussions, we assess risk, considering things as significant, higher or lower risk, and those risks dictate our risk response. And that's where the bulk of the audit work occurs, is the risk response. We come on site for a number of weeks, work with management here on site performing test of details, analytical procedures, with the ultimate goal of becoming comfortable with the financial information that we were provided by management. After we perform our risk response and testing, we move into what I would call the report preparation and wrap phase of the audit. As I mentioned, we assist with the preparation of the ACFR, that's drafting of the financial statements, the footnotes, many of the supplemental schedules that accompany the financial statements. And when we do so, we ensure that those financials reflect the information that we tested and audited. And after the preparation of the financials, we do perform, again, a high-level analytic to say, you know, we were in the details, we were in the weeds, we did all this work. Does the final report reflect ultimately what we tested? And then the final piece there that's listed is the independent quality reviewer. In addition to our audit team and the engagement executive that performs the review of the audit, we have someone independent within our firm that's a partner that is not a part of the audit that comes in and does a final overview to make sure there's kind of a fine tune, to make sure there's nothing that we've missed, to look at it with a fine tooth comb. And after that process, we allow management to review the financial statements as well, ensure that they're comfortable with the final product, and then ultimately move toward finalizing the audit. Some accounting changes that you'll note this year as opposed to the prior year. This is detailed in note 16 of the ACFR as well. But we had some changes in reporting entity this year. And there's really two triggers that can result in a change in reporting entity. The first relates to quantitative thresholds. This is pretty cut and dry. An analysis is done to say, for each fund, what are the assets, liabilities, revenues, and expenditures within those funds, and how large are they in terms of the entire city's assets, liabilities, et cetera. And so those quantitative thresholds can move funds from major to non-major, or non-major to major funds. Those are listed there on the left-hand side of the screen. The other factors are qualitative, and this is more related to the nature of the fund and looking at the qualitative characteristics. And we consider the understandability, reliability, relevance, timeliness, consistency, and comparability as factors. And so this year we had a few qualitative changes. We discussed these with management really at the start of the audit. The first there relates to some community centers. Many of them were reported as governmental funds in the financial statements, whereas you had a recreation center that was recorded as an enterprise fund. So for consistency's sake, for the reader of the financial statements, it made sense to really treat those in the same manner. So those community centers were moved out of the Parks Board Fund and into an enterprise fund. The other two items listed there relate to the sanitary landfill. The landfill was closed in 2019, and what we see in practice generally is once a landfill is closed, there's very little financial activity that is moving within that fund. And so practice is to move those into the general fund. Management's still tracking those separately internally within the accounting system, but from a presentation standpoint, those amounts are listed within your general fund. There were two new accounting standards that the city adopted this year. GASB 101, compensated absences, really relates to paid time off and sick pay of the city. And it had been really since the early 90s since GASB had issued any new guidance on how to account for compensated absences. And as we've gone through time here, there's a lot of different policies now that cities have. And so GASB said, let's kick the tires here and make sure that everyone is reporting this financial information consistently across all different municipalities. So we worked with management to make sure that the accounting standard was adopted appropriately, accounted as the standard suggests. And I want to point out here that this doesn't change the internal policies of the city in terms of how employees accrue time off or can use time off. This is really a matter of accounting function and presentation. And then GASB Statement 102 for certain risk disclosures. This relates to cities or municipalities that should disclose certain concentrations and constraints. There was one additional disclosure added, a final paragraph in Note 1 of your ACFR to call out the concentration of property taxes as a percentage of revenue of the city. So about 27% of the city's revenue comes from Jackson County property taxes. No other disclosure changes as a result of that. And then we do issue opinions on the internal control over financial reporting and internal control over compliance. No material weaknesses or significant deficiencies in internal controls related to those reports. And then, as I mentioned, we did also perform a compliance audit over your major federal awards programs. This year there was only one major program, the Coronavirus State and Local Fiscal Recovery Funds. No findings or question costs in relation to that audit. We issued an unmodified, clean opinion on the major program as well. So with that, I'll open it up to any questions. I'm happy to cover anything in the big report that I didn't cover as well, but or anything that I touched on here.
All right, thank you. Do we have any questions from the committee? Yes, we're glad that the audit came back clean.
All right. Good deal.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
All right, that takes us to roundtable. Do we have any roundtable from the committee? No. Do we have any roundtable from staff?
In our discussion at pre-meeting, we talked about some education coming forward on recoupment and related to, understanding the impacts of the changes in Jackson County property tax. Today or tomorrow, you'll receive a memo from, from the city manager. Actually, should be hot off the press in your email.
Okay.
And that is a summary of a meeting that that Brianna and I both attended on behalf of the city manager with the county and other regional government agencies that was hosted at Mid-America Regional Council. They provided kind of a FAQ from that meeting, and so I think that's the summary you'll have. And so more discussion to come, I guess, and that should give you as council guidance on what you want to see as part of that discussion. So.
Okay, great. Yeah, and just for the awareness of the committee members, as we kind of continue to deal with the fallout of the Jackson County assessment, everything. We as a council at some point may have to make a decision about recoupment of, whether to basically retroactively adjust our levy, which we will get some really great education from staff about so that we can all understand it, because I'm explaining it terribly. But I asked them before we have to make that decision to come forward with some education for us so that we can have a good basis of understanding when we eventually have to have that discussion, make those decisions. So that'll be coming up in a future meeting.
Is that before the next budget is prepared?
Yes, ideally. So the county said that they would have an additional meeting and some final numbers, especially on the commercial rebates that they've done by the end of January. So if we're lucky, we'll have some update at the February Finance and Budget Committee, and then it might even be something that we schedule a special session or something on as well, because I think it will be multiple meetings, like an educational meeting, and then we'll have to have some decisions and look at that. But there's also, in the bullet points you'll see, there's also some timelines of some of those numbers that do fall later, even into the summer timeline, July. So some of it might be late in our budget process. We might be coming back with budget amendments. We'll just kind of have to go with the flow as we get the most relevant information.
Okay, thank you. If we don't have any other roundtable, then we will adjourn this meeting at 5:22 p.m. Thank you all.